This video will explore the impact of Catholic missionaries and priests in the 1800s onwards. Australia was new ground for the Catholic missionaries. Settlers had little spiritual support, and so there seemed to be a need for missions. The missionaries also got involved with Indigenous Australian communities, such that many Indigenous spiritualities today, particularly in the Torres Strait, are a mixture of traditional Indigenous beliefs and Christian beliefs. Missionaries are often presented as heroic. They travelled to an unknown land, they suffered considerable hardships, and they were often not well equipped or even well dressed with their heavy dark habits in pursuit of spreading the gospel, the good news. As you can see from the quote on your screen, there was a Christian population amongst the convicts taken to Australia. This religious population increased with the advance of the gold rush in the second half of the 19th century, which brought many more settlers to Australia. Many missions were founded in areas where Indigenous communities lived. The leaders of these missions provided the mindset for how the mission would engage with Indigenous people. In some cases, the Indigenous culture and traditions were respected, but in other cases they were not. Some believe that the Catholic Church has to take responsibility for the erosion of Indigenous culture through many of its missions in the early years of engagement with Indigenous communities. The missions often educated the young people of the Indigenous community, but in some missions, these youngsters were forced to speak English and forbidden from speaking their first language. One of the Catholic religious orders that founded missions in Australia was the Jesuits, otherwise known as the Society of Jesus, a male order formed in 1540, following the spiritual exercises of its founder, St. Ignatius of Loyola. Pope Francis is the first Jesuit pope of the Catholic Church. It was two Jesuits from Austria that founded the first Jesuit mission in Adelaide in 1848. They were followed by Jesuits from Ireland, who arrived in Melbourne in 1865. There were 3 separate Jesuit missions in Australia until 1901, when the groups merged to form the Australian Mission. Many priests came to Australia from Ireland and other parts of Europe to support the mission of the Catholic Church in the 19th century. These priests helped to establish schools and monasteries and supported new and growing communities of settlers, as well as teaching the basis of their religion, the gospel, to Indigenous communities who had never heard it. The image on your screen is of John Brady, an Irish missionary priest who arrived in Fremantle in 1843. In 1845, Pope Gregory XVI established the Diocese of Perth, and John Brady became its first bishop, overseeing the missionaries whose task it was to spread the gospel amongst the Indigenous community. It is easy to focus on the failings of the missionaries. They were unprepared for the task they had committed themselves to. They often undermined traditional Aboriginal culture. They could be perceived to be cruel. However, unlike other settlers who removed or killed people from Indigenous communities, the Catholic missionaries at least recognized the humanity of Indigenous populations. They may have been misguided in their desire to impose their beliefs on others, but they believed in the value of educating the uneducated and providing for their basic human needs, which at the time the government was not prepared to do.